Why does the excitement of a pay raise wear off after just a few months? Is Apple's Tim Cook good for shareholders? And what free tool can help you find savings accounts and other property you didn't even know were yours? We'll answer these questions and more on the 61st episode of the DoughRoller Podcast.
Welcome to the DoughRoller Podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Hey, whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. Hey, everybody, welcome to the 61st episode of the DoughRoller Podcast. Hey, I want to first give a big thank you to everyone who left a review in iTunes of this show during the month of April. As you know, I was running a giveaway of a $100 Amazon gift card in exchange for honest ratings and reviews in iTunes, and I really appreciate those who took the time to leave those ratings and reviews. They help me make this show better. And if you haven't left a review and a rating, I really would appreciate it even after the giveaway. You can do that. Just go to doughroller.net/iTunes. It'll redirect you to the iTunes page where this podcast resides. As always, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. Got a lot going on in today's show. Actually going to cover a number of topics. But want to begin with the money tool of the day, which actually comes from a reader. Her name is Stephanie. She and I have exchanged some email on really a host of issues, and I got to tell you, she is hitting it out of the park in just about every aspect of personal finance and investing. If I could bottle Stephanie and sell it, her investing and personal finance or approach to both, I would be a billionaire. But the money tool of the day comes from Stephanie. This is a tool that she used, and it's called missingmoney.com. missingmoney.com. It's a free tool. You can put your name in there, where you live, and it will search for things like savings accounts and other unclaimed property that are in your name. Believe it or not, folks find savings accounts and other assets that they did not even know they own. And in fact, that's exactly what Stephanie did. She found a savings account that she didn't know she had, that her mother had opened for her years earlier through missingmoney.com. Then she searched for her under her brother's name and I think found another savings account that he owned that he didn't know about. Makes you wish you were related to Stephanie, huh? Well, in any event, it's worth checking out. As I said, it's free. It worked for Stephanie. Maybe it'll work for you as well. Missingmoney.com. I will say that I did search for my name and came up with nothing, but that's okay. Those things happen. And it only takes a couple of seconds, and who knows, maybe you'll find some money that you didn't know you had. Stephanie, thanks for bringing that to my attention. That's the money tool of the day, missingmoney.com. Okay, the next topic I want to go into is kind of a bit of a news item, and it relates to management of publicly traded companies and whether they have their own best interests at heart when they're making decisions, or, as they should, do they have the shareholders' best interests at heart? And this issue has come up with a company that I've invested in, as you know if you've listened to this podcast, and that's Apple. And a couple of things have happened this year that give me at least pause about how things are being managed at Apple. And I want to tell you about them, just as a way to kind of give you a sense as to the things that I evaluate when I'm looking at investing in individual companies. I think it's important, too, for the larger companies, even if you're in index funds, if you're in an S&P 500 index, you're going to own a lot of the larger companies because they are capitalization weighted. In other words, you're going to own more in an index fund of the larger companies in the S&P 500 than you will of the smaller companies. So what the big companies like Apple do really affect the performance of those funds. And so here are the two things that happen. The first is back in, I think it was March, there was a shareholder meeting. And Tim Cook, the CEO, was answering questions. And an organization by the name of the National Center for Public Policy Research, NCPPR, I don't know a thing about them. From what I've read, they are apparently a conservative think tank. They were challenging Tim Cook's stated goal of having Apple generate all of its power, 100% of its power from green sources. And they asked Mr. Cook a couple of questions. The first question was whether this plan, 100% green energy, was good for the bottom line. And And he didn't answer that question, but then they kind of asked a more general question, and that is if he would commit to only doing those things that were profitable. Now, what is interesting about this is Tim Cook's response. He got very, very angry, which apparently for Tim Cook is unusual. He's not an explosive personality. And here's the first thing he said. He said, when we work on making our devices accessible by the blind, I don't consider the bloody ROI. And ROI is return on investment. That was the first thing he said. And then he said, if you want me to do things only for ROI reasons, you should get out of this stock. Now, I was very troubled by these comments. And the interesting thing is I was actually disappointed, too, in the media coverage, because the media coverage tended to focus on who was right and who was wrong. Should it be 100% green energy or not? Is climate change real? What's causing climate change? And to me, all important issues, of course, but they really missed the point on this exchange. And here's how I viewed it. It's without doubt that when management can't make every single decision based on a spreadsheet, right? Based on an ROI, any more than we can in our own personal lives and our own choices about how we spend money. Not everything can be easily decided on dollars and cents. And in fact, I think Tim Cook mentions a perfectly good example. What is the value of making Apple products accessible by the blind? I'm going to just go out on a limb and guess that if you looked at the revenue generated on sales of gadgets used by the blind versus what it cost Apple to manufacture devices and the software to make them accessible by the blind, that they don't have a good return on investment, that they lose money. But I think we would all agree that there's a lot of value in making devices accessible by the blind. And so, that's a perfect example of something that's very difficult for management to, open up a spreadsheet and decide, should we do this or not? And I think, frankly, the same thing is true about a company's impact on the environment. It's very difficult to boil down that impact and the cause of it, in dollars and cents in a spreadsheet. It's very difficult. So a lot of times you're letting higher values and your instinct, frankly, inform the decision as much as you are the cost, right? Although we shouldn't say that there's a blank check. If Apple announced tomorrow that they're coming out with a new iPhone and, hey, by the way, we're going to spend $500 billion to make it accessible by the blind, they'd probably have some questions to answer. That's just not feasible, right? So I don't think it's fair to say that the costs don't matter. I would say that they're not the only thing that matters. And again, I think that's true in our own lives as we make decisions about our own personal finance and investing. But here's the thing that really troubled me, and what I think the press missed by and large, is that I think it's a fair question to be asked of Tim Cook. How much is this costing? That's a fair question. It's not saying that necessarily that it's a bad decision, but what is this costing, and what is the value that it will return to Apple? And again, I don't think that should be the only consideration in a decision like this. Again, values and instinct and all these other things come into play, but it's not irrelevant. And I was very disappointed that Tim Cook reacted so angrily, and it was almost defensive. I mean, it almost made me wonder, gee, what's going on there at Apple? How much are they spending if he can't give a straight answer to this? And when he said, if you want me to do things only for ROI reasons, you should get out of this stock. Well, first of all, I don't think that's quite fair. But secondly, it's, wait a minute, Mr. Cook, you work for the shareholders. We don't work for you. The issue isn't whether we get out of the stock. The question is whether you stay on as CEO. Now, I realize if he were to disclose all of this information, shareholders would assess whether they like it or not. And and some shareholders might sell and others might buy. But at the end of the day, this gave me some real concern about his view of his role in the company and the fact that he is answerable to shareholders. And when shareholders ask questions like this, I think you should just give them a straight answer. I think that's how Warren Buffett would do it. I mean, I was at the last shareholders meeting for Berkshire Hathaway last year, and he was asked some tough questions. And he always gave straight answers. And I think that's what Tim Cook owes shareholders in this regard. And if his position on going 100% green energy is defensible, and it may very well be, he ought to be able to give a clear, concise, straightforward answer as to why and justify it. And it may not all be justifiable on ROI, fine. but he ought to be able to articulate why and what it's costing, and why he thinks it's the right decision for Apple and its shareholders. So this was the first nick in the armor, the chink in the armor, if you will, that kind of concerned me with Apple. Maybe not a huge thing, but it was a concern for me. The second one was this recent announcement that Apple is going to split their stock 7-for-1. I discussed this along with dividends and buybacks in episode 60. You can find that at DoughRoller.net/podcast 60, podcast 60. But as I mentioned there, stock splits have absolutely no value for shareholders, none. It doesn't increase the intrinsic value of a company at all. It's like cutting your pizza in more slices. You still have the same amount of pizza. And that's not to say that stock splits are bad, and sometimes there are reasons, important reasons, to split a stock. Although Apple certainly didn't give one in this case. They said they wanted to make the stock more accessible to retail investors, which I just think is a bunch of hooey. I have no idea why they split the stock, and I suspect there are other things going on, but it's a concern to me because they need to keep their eye on the ball, which is innovating and bringing to market new products and doing things like making Siri actually work. As an iPhone owner, I can tell you that thing is frustrating. Rather than worrying about splitting their stock 7-for-1. Now, are these things that cause me to go run off and sell the shares I own in Apple? No, I still think it's a great company, and I've got big hopes for it, and of course watching it closely. But these two things concerned me, and I'll keep an eye on it, keep watching it. Curious what you think about these sorts of things. If you have an opinion, shoot me an email at dr@DoughRoller.net. Okay. The next topic I want to cover briefly has to do with interest rates, bond durations, and the performance of bond funds. I talked about bond duration in episode 56, again, DoughRoller.net/podcast 56, and I did so because a lot of listeners have emailed me concerned about whether they should be investing in bond mutual funds, given that interest rates are very low right now, and the fact that as interest rates rise, all other things being equal, the value of bonds falls. And again, you can go back to episode 56 if you want to understand that better. But I thought I would just very briefly share with you my approach to bond investing right now and why. So all of my first of all, I don't change my asset allocation. It was 80-20, it's been 80-20 for a while. I don't change that because interest rates are low and we all think they're going to move higher at some point over the next year, 2 years, 5 years. It's hard to imagine them staying this low forever, right? But I don't change my asset allocation. Right now it's 80-20. I'm letting the 20 actually slowly rise probably to about 25 over the next few years. And I'm not going to change that because interest rates are low any more than I'm going to change it because I think the market is high. I'm just not good at timing the market, so I don't try. But that being said, I tend to keep my bond portfolio in intermediate term a bond fund. So you can think of bond funds as short, intermediate, or long. So short term would mean the bonds mature in, let's say, a year or two is typical for most short term bond funds. Intermediate bond funds, again, there's no hard and fast rule, but I would say they tend to mature in the 5 to 7 year range. And then long term are, of course, longer than that, 10 years or more. And as you know, the longer the maturity or the longer the duration of the bond fund, the more it's impacted by changes in interest rates. And but here's the thing. Let's take a 5-year a bond fund that matures on average, has an average duration of 5 years. So if interest rates were to go up by 1%, the value of that fund would drop by 5%, right? It drops by, for every 1% that interest rates go up, a bond fund drops by a percentage equal to its average bond duration, okay? But now let's think about a bond fund like this. So how do they keep their average duration at 5 years? Because, they have a 5-year bond today. A year from now, it's just a 4-year bond, right? It's aged. And 2 years from now, it's a 3-year bond. So what do? Well, they have to sell. They have to sell bonds and then buy bonds with longer durations to keep their target goal of, in the example I'm using, a 5-year duration. So when they sell those bonds, if interest rates have gone up, they've got to sell them at a discount to convince people to buy them, right? Who wants to buy a bond that's got a lower interest rate than you can get at today's prevailing market? So how do you sell it? Well, you discount it. That's where the bond funds lose money, right? But here's the thing. When they go to buy the replacement bond, right, they're buying a current bond that's got a higher interest rate, right? So yes, the rise in interest rates causes the value of existing bonds to go down. But as a fund sells bonds and buys new bonds to keep their duration at in this case, 5 years, they're buying bonds that now have higher yields. So, yes, there's the bad side of things because interest rates are going up, so the value of bonds go down. But the good side is when they sell and buy new bonds, they're getting bonds at higher yields. And so those higher yields offset the loss that the fund incurred by the rising interest rates. Hope you followed that. But I think the key though is for me is not getting into funds that are longer than intermediate term. That's what I tend to do. Intermediate bond funds, recognizing that yes, if the interest rates go up, they'll lose some value at first, but over time they'll get that back as they invest in new bonds with higher yields. And you may be saying, well, wait a minute, if that's true, Rob, doesn't that work with long-term bonds? Yeah, it does. It just takes longer, right? Because the initial shock of the higher interest rates causes a greater loss. So yes, you can eventually earn that back through higher yields. It just takes longer. There's actually a formula for that, how long it takes. I don't know, maybe that's for another podcast. But the point is, yeah, it does work for any length of bond, any duration. But the longer the duration, the longer it takes. And so I'm very comfortable, for me, with intermediate term bonds, bond funds, and so that's what I do. So in any event, really a response to a number of emails that I've received. I don't change my asset allocation because of where interest rates are. And I recognize that long-term, yes, bond funds may take a hit when interest rates rise, but they'll also benefit from the higher yields. And over time, that helps offset the loss. Okay, now we're on to the main topic of today. And that was, remember I asked a question, why does the excitement of a pay raise wear off after just a few months? And the answer is hedonic adaptation. That's the fancy word for it. Some call it the hedonic treadmill. And just to kind of give you an idea of this, I want to start off with a story. This comes from a book by Bogle, the founder of Vanguard. And he starts off this book telling a story, very short story. Here it is. Two famous authors, Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller, are talking at a party hosted by a billionaire hedge fund manager. Kurt says to Joseph, this billionaire makes more money in one day than you made in your whole lifetime from your novel Catch-22. Joe responds, yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough. That comes from Bogle's book titled Enough. Here's my question for you. Do you have enough? If not, what will your life look like when you do have enough? I think that's one of the hardest questions to answer. We are hardwired to constantly want more. We want a nicer car. We want a bigger bank account balance. We want a bigger home. We want nicer gadgets. We want a bigger TV. When I was a kid, I was thrilled with the color TV that we had that was 19 inches. Man, that was just the biggest thing I'd ever seen. It was amazing. Can you imagine going over to a friend's house today to watch the Super Bowl and they bring out their 19-inch television? It's almost like it's hard to have enough and to be happy with enough and to not want more. And that brings me back to hedonic adaptation. What is that? We have an innate ability to adjust our level of happiness, whether it's to good things or even to bad things. And that really is at the heart of hedonic adaptation. When we get that raise, we're excited at first. It's great. Maybe you may go out and celebrate. Hopefully you maybe increase your 401k contributions. But it's fun, and we tell people about it, got a raise, and it's exciting. And then a day or two goes by, a week goes by, a month goes by, and after a while, it's just comfortable. And if we imagine fast forwarding a year to when maybe another raise is on the way and we don't get it. Now we're upset, we're angry. What's happened? Well, we've simply adapted to the increase in the income. Now, this is not a new concept. Dostoevsky knew all about hedonic adaptation. He said, man is a pliant animal, a being who gets accustomed to anything. Right? So the reality is hedonic adaptation occurs. It occurs in response to both positive things and negative experiences. But here's the interesting thing. We adapt more quickly and completely to positive experiences than we do to negative experiences. We adapt to negative experiences, but we adapt more slowly. And I think there are some negative experiences that we all encounter, if you will, that we never fully adapt to. I mean, I can think of just in my own personal life. My father died in a car accident when he was 39. I was 12. The reality is I adapted to that experience. It doesn't affect my happiness today, if you will, like it did when I was 12, of course, right? Although even now, almost 50, I can tell you I've never fully adapted to that loss in my life. And my guess is you all have experienced losses that you don't fully adapt to, but you do adapt. And when it comes to positive experiences, we actually adapt much more quickly and more completely. And so really the question and topic for today is this: how can we harness the power of hedonic adaptation to improve our finances? And I want to give you 6 ways. The first one is just simply to recognize its effect in our lives. And I can think of a couple of examples in my life where I've seen hedonic adaptation at play. The first was buying our first home. We bought our first home in 1993, and I can remember today laying in bed that first night thinking, I cannot believe all of this is ours. Now, it was not, we loved the home. It was a very modest home, a 50-year-old, 3-bedroom, single-story home on 0.2 acres of land in Northern Virginia. But man, I can remember that first night there just thinking, I cannot believe all of this is mine. And, but it didn't take long for that to wear off. And after a few months, you kind of get used to it. Yeah, this is the house. Yeah, it needs painted. Goodness, the gutters are falling off the house. Got to get that fixed. And then you get to, man, how can we make this house bigger? Let's add a room. We actually converted a deck to a 3-season room, and love that. But it was like, this is kind of feeling small after a few years. This is kind of tight, A hedonic adaptation set in. We got used to it. The effect it had on our happiness that first night in the home wore off. And it didn't take that long. Same is true with raises. I mentioned that earlier, but I can remember in 1999 getting a big, big raise. I mean, a big raise. And it was because what was going on in the legal industry at the time. It wasn't specific to me. Basically, all associates at most large law firms got these huge raises in 1999 as this was sort of in the precursor to during the dot-com bubble. And man, that was exciting. But you know what? The big raise wore off, just like our first home. I mean, it was exciting. It was great. And then you kind of just got accustomed to it. And after a while, it was just the way things were. It didn't seem special anymore. I can remember with buying my first, what I would consider my nice car. It was an Acura TL in 1999, actually the same year I got that big raise. And man, I loved that car. And I'm not really a car person, but boy, it was nice. But you know what? After a while, it was just sort of the car I drove. I got in it, didn't really think about it, and then drove to work or, drove to church or drove to the store or wherever. And in fact, a time came when I just sold it because I preferred to have the money, and the car just wasn't that important to me. But it was great at first. But so the key here is to recognize hedonic adaptation in your own life. Think about experiences you've had. Maybe you got that raise, or you bought the new car, or the new home, or the new gadget, and maybe it increased your level of happiness for a while. But my guess is, for most things, over time, it wore off. You got used to it. It just became normal. And then you, in fact, want it even more. So that's the first thing today, is you got to recognize the effect this has in your life. And I think that, frankly, of the 6 things I'm going to go through, that's the most important. You've got to recognize that it's there. So think about it. I think you'll find it in play in your own life. Then, once you recognize it, the second step is to use this knowledge to curb your desire for things, to curb your desire for the bigger home, the nicer car, the bigger TV, the new gadgets, whatever. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that you never go out and buy something nice. But I think we can take this knowledge that we've got and really think about how important this next big purchase you're considering really is. Do you really need to move to that bigger home? I've talked. We're in our second home. It's much bigger than our first home, and there have been times when I've thought, "Boy, we should add on to this home." And then I come back to this hedonic adaptation principle, and I say, "Rob, that's just stupid. It's not going to increase your happiness. It's going to cost a lot of money. You're not going to get the money back when you sell the home. You almost never do on a renovation of any kind. You'll get some of it back, but not all of it. What are you doing? You got to take this knowledge you've got and you've got to put it to use. I'm putting it to use. As I've mentioned, I'm switching from Verizon to Republic Wireless, and I'm getting rid of the iPhone, but I'm saving a ton of money. And I'm a Mac addict, but the reality is the iPhone doesn't increase the quality of my life one bit. It just doesn't. And the same is true. There's all kinds of new TVs out that have come out since we bought our TV many years ago. They've got the smart TVs and all of that. But the reality is it's just not going to increase our level of happiness. So the second thing to do is once you recognize how hedonic adaptation works and how it's affected you in the past, now use it as you make purchasing decisions going forward. Again, it doesn't mean you won't ever buy something nice or improve what you have, but really give some thought to how it's going to impact your life, both from a happiness perspective and how it's going to impact your finances. The third thing is to recognize that lifestyle inflation is really hard to undo. It's hard to go backwards. You get accustomed, to these new things. They then become sort of the normal. You've raised the bar of what it takes to be happy. That's what actually causes people to then buy the bigger home and the nicer car and the bigger TV. But now imagine trying to step backward to save some money. Now, folks do it all the time. Sometimes they do it because they've just had enough of all of the debt they're in. They just are fed up, and getting out of debt is more important than a nicer car to them. So there are things that can happen in our lives that sort of force us to rein in this lifestyle inflation, and to even set it in reverse. Sometimes you downsize. I did that with my car, that Acura that I loved that I bought in 1999. We sold it because the money was more important to us than the car. But it's hard to do. And so I think understanding that lifestyle inflation can be there and that it's hard to undo can keep you from making bad decisions in the first place. Fourth thing, stop comparing your lifestyle to others. We talk about this a lot. It's a common concept in personal finance where your neighbor pulls into the driveway with a nice car and you think, man, I wish I had that nice car. Or they start that addition, or they're renovating their kitchen, or they're going on expensive vacations. It's hard not to compare yourself to other people, and I still do it today. I can't help myself, but the difference is I catch myself when I'm doing it, and I say, Rob, quit being an idiot. And in fact, sometimes I almost get judgmental. I try to stop that too, but I'll see folks that I know are maybe struggling financially, and they pull in the driveway with a brand new car, and I'm thinking, what in the world are you doing? But it's easy to compare ourselves to others, and it's just not healthy. And I think one of the worst culprits, Facebook. We all have those friends that seem to be prolific on Facebook. And every time they're posting, it's pictures of their vacation or their home renovation. Their life seems to just be perfect, with pictures of their house. Everything is in order. And we compare ourselves to them. I think Facebook in that regard can be a real bummer. And if you find yourself doing it, maybe you just need to close Facebook a little bit more. I don't want to get preachy here, so don't take it that way. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself, because I do that. I see folks on Facebook, I think, man, their lives are perfect. Everything seems perfect. Of course, that's just the part of their lives they decide to share on Facebook. But I think Facebook can be one way where we compare ourselves and the lifestyles to others, and it just saps you of contentment. Why do it? Why let it into your life? Okay. The fifth thing, understand what's most important to you. So far we've kind of talked about avoiding lifestyle inflation, avoiding always wanting more. But that's sort of the negative side, if you will. There's a positive side to this, and that is to understand what's most important to you and to make decisions with that in mind. So as I was preparing for this podcast, I thought, okay, well, that's fair. What's most important to me? And I came up with 4 things. My family, our health, my time, and my faith. Those are the 4 most important things to me. And none of them, for the most part, have anything to do with money. Yeah, we pay a membership at a club, so I guess money's involved. But they're not really about buying the new gadget, buying the nicer car, buying the bigger home. My family, my health, my time, and my faith. And as it relates to my career, time is the most important thing to me. Time to be able to do what I enjoy doing for a career. And that can mean not making as much money. I may be able to make more money, but doing something that I'm really not passionate about. And that's something that I'm sort of focused on right now as I make some career decisions that perhaps I'll talk about in another podcast. But I think here's the thing: if you list out what's most important to you, and then make financial decisions based on that, it will help you avoid sort of the lifestyle inflation. And when I think about my own personal finance decisions, to me, not spending money in ways that don't bring lasting happiness allows me to use our money in a way that will bring lasting happiness. But you can't do that until you know what it looks like. That's where I came back to the beginning of this podcast, and I said, do you have enough? And if you did, what would it look like? And for me, it comes back to this fifth point. And again, for me, family, health, time, and faith. Your list may be a little different. Maybe it's the same. The important point is not that your list looks like mine. It probably won't, but that you have your own list. What's most important to you? Okay. The sixth and final way that I think we can harness the power of hedonic adaptation is simplicity. I find as a general rule, when I'm about to make decisions, whether it's about buying something or not, how we live our lives, that if we focus on simplicity, we usually go down the right path. A smaller house is simpler than a bigger one, and much less expensive, not only to buy it, but to maintain it, as I am about to pay a couple $1,000s to have the gutters on our house that are falling off replaced. This is hitting home. Or as I spent money on a furnace and an air conditioner a few months ago and had to get really big ones because we live in a larger home. I'm already talking to my wife about downsizing. One car is much simpler than two. A clutter-free house is much simpler than lots of clutter. And in fact, that's something I'm really focused on now. Moving is a big deal and expensive and emotional and something that takes a lot of time. We're just not right. We're not at that point right now. I think we will be, of course. We'll downsize at some point, but we're not there. But boy, I can get the clutter out of our home and in the process make a little money. I'm in the process of selling stuff that we don't need on eBay and Craigslist. And not only does it generate money for us, it declutters the home, and it takes these items that are just laying around here and puts them to good use with someone who could actually use them. But the point is, as you think about choices, think about how simple the simplicity or the complexity of whatever it is you're confronting. And I think if we focus on simplicity, we'll generally be heading in the right direction. So that's my view. I hope you have gotten something out of this. Hedonic adaptation is, I think, very real, and I think it can help us understand what's truly important to us and what truly brings happiness. Folks talk about budgeting and getting out of debt, and we always see it as a sacrifice. We see not having that bigger home as a sacrifice, or the nicer car, or the bigger TV. I actually think most of these things aren't as big a sacrifice as we make them out to be. And if we give that some thought, maybe you'll agree with me. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed the show. There's the music. If you have any comments about this episode, don't hesitate to email me, dr@DoughRoller.net. I'm getting a ton of email on all kinds of questions, some of which I don't even know, and I go do research. And they become topics for future shows. So don't hesitate to email me. I do read and respond to every single email. You can do that at dr@DoughRoller.net. As I mentioned at the top of the show, appreciate any honest ratings and reviews you can give of the podcast. You can just go to DoughRoller.net/iTunes, and that will redirect you to the iTunes page where this podcast resides. And lastly, if you're not already, please subscribe to the newsletter, DoughRoller.net/newsletter. Very easy to do. It only goes out once a week, but I have important information that I put in that newsletter, including some free webinars that I'm going to be hosting on personal finance and also webinars on blogging. You don't want to miss them. So remember, until next time, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.